Hey there, subs and visitors. Hope you're all doing well. I appreciate you all so much and all of your amazing comments that you leave on my channel. It's so much appreciated. In a video I made several months ago called Revolution 9, I looked at 16 cycles of 9 years and I began in 1896. And in this video, I'm also going to begin in 1896, but I'm going to look at different cycles and different events, mainly relating to the Olympics. So I'll start in 1896 when the first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens. Now, if I add 48 years to 1896, that brings me out to 1944, where there were no Olympics because of World War II. And then if I add another 48 years, that brings us out to 1992 Barcelona Olympics, which I covered about a month ago. And then if you add another 48 years, it brings us to 2040, where I assume there will be no Olympics. Now, 1944 plus another 40 years brings us to 1984, where there was the Olympic boycott, the Soviet boycott. And if you add another 40 years to 1984, that brings us to this year, where it states in an article that under the same IOC guidelines for Russian and Belarusian athletes competing in Paris in 2024, athletes participating neutrally must respect the Olympic Charter. They can still be barred from competing neutrally if they have actively supported the war in Ukraine or have not fully complied with anti-doping rules. And Russia claims that there's a bias in allowing Israeli athletes to compete in the wake of the Hamas attack on Israel and Israel's subsequent bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Russian officials are accusing the IOC of hypocrisy by allowing Israeli athletes to participate in the 2024 Games. So in 1984, boycott occurred where Russia didn't want to play, and now, 40 years later, they're not allowed to play. And there were 108 years between the first modern Olympic Games in Athens to the second time Athens held the Olympics in 2004. And there's 108 years between 1916, the first time the Olympics were cancelled, and the 2024 Paris Olympics this year. On July 30th in 1916, there was an explosion at the Black Tom munitions depot in nearby Jersey City. And the Black Tom explosion is said to have been an act of sabotage by agents of the German Empire to destroy US-made munitions that were to be supplied to the Allies in World War I. The explosions, which occurred in New York Harbor, killed 7 people and wounded hundreds more. It also caused damage of military goods worth $560 million in 2024 standard US currency. And this incident, which happened prior to US entry into World War I, also damaged the Statue of Liberty. The explosion damaged the statue's arm and torch, which were later removed and replaced. And fragments from the explosion travelled long distances, some lodged into the Statue of Liberty. The explosion was the equivalent of an earthquake measuring between 5.0 and 5.5 on the Richter scale, and it was one of the largest artificial non-nuclear explosions in history. For the first time in the history of the Olympic Summer Games, the opening ceremony will not take place in a stadium. Paris 24 is bringing sports into the city, and the same will be true of the opening ceremony, set to be held in the heart of the city along its main artery, the Seine. And a temporary outdoor arena will be built in order to stage the beach volleyball and blind football events right near it's going to be called the Eiffel Tower Stadium, which is right smack bang in the Field of Mars. And the Field of Mars is named after the Roman god of war. It's a large public green space in Paris. And a little extra information here for my Aussie subs. The suburb of Marsfield was originally named Field of Mars. In 1792, Governor Phillip gave land on the north side of the harbour to 8 former British Marines and named the area the Field of Mars. It's believed that Phillip named it Field of Mars after the Roman god of war. In an article I read that was released just 15 hours ago, there was a spokesperson who stated that there's no clear-cut threat yet against the Games and the country, but he'd like to remind us that at the end of May, 2 individuals were arrested and were plotting a project aimed directly at the Olympic Games. Okay, so we have 16 years left to go before 2040, so I thought I'd take a look at what happened 16 years prior to 1902. US President Grover Cleveland dedicates the Statue of Liberty, a gift from France in New York Harbor. So you add 138 years to that date, brings us to 2024, which is 16 years before 2040. So with everything going on in the world at the moment and the planned event for the Olympics in Paris, I wonder if something will happen in relation to the Statue of Liberty in Paris, which sits on Swan Island. I did mention Statue of Liberty and the inauguration in 1886 in a video about a month ago, and I was thinking more about the US Statue of Liberty, but now I'm wondering whether something's going to happen in Paris rather than in the US. Now, I had to look at this Under Paris movie, and I got to say, if you haven't watched it, don't bother. It's terrible. Anyway, so the timing of this movie release and it also due to its popularity, this could cause viewers who wouldn't normally watch the events to tune in. And the original name of that movie in French is Under the Seine, not Under Paris. So I don't know why they decided to name it Under Paris for us English-speaking folk, but that's what it's originally called, Under the Seine. And so the river itself is full of stuff, centuries worth of objects. And back before Paris was even an abstract concept, Neanderthals were said to have left flint tools on the Seine's banks, which was seen as evidence that they weren't as primitive as scientists once thought. Later, when the city on the Seine was known by the name Lutetia, residents of the Gallo-Roman outposts sometimes made offerings to the river in exchange for good fortune. So once adorning altars in private homes in Lutetia, metal figurines of deities like Apollo and Mercury were found underneath layers of silt in the riverbed. And around a dozen or so shells or bits of ammunition are pulled from the river each year, including artefacts from both world wars. Which brings me to the 1972 Seahorse Flare, which is now looked at as a Carrington-class event. And the initial onset was on the 2nd of August 1972 and dissipated on the 11th of August 1972. And in the scientific article, it explains that the magnetized clouds of gas ejected by such events usually take about 3 days to reach the Earth, when in this case it took only 15 hours. And on August 4th, 1972, US military pilots flying south of Haiphong Harbour in North Vietnam saw something unexpected. More than 24 sea mines suddenly and without apparent explanation exploded in the water. In a separate article I found, it's claimed that the US found out that the cause of these explosions, which were estimated to be as many as 4,000, were not caused by enemy ships. So yeah, there were dozens, and then it turns out that, some suggest it was upward of thousands. And when I was watching this movie, Under Paris, this ammunition under the Seine started to cause explosions. I mean, I looked into this 1972 Seahorse Flare a while ago, and I was imagining something happening in 2024 with random explosions. And only a few months ago, we had the incredible aurora occurring all over the world. So, there's still plenty of time left in this year for something major like that to happen. And then seeing that whole thing in the movie, I was like, that's insane. This researcher and engineer believes that in 1972, the solar storm was on par with the famed Carrington event, which was a significant event that astronomers recorded in 1859. This researcher added that the solar storm and the subsequent explosion of dozens of sea mines should be seen as a cautionary tale. People today are far more dependent on space satellites, so to speak, for communications and navigation than they were in 1972. and those satellites sit right in the path of potential solar storms. So, these types of articles are gearing people up for the possibility of a grid failure worldwide or in localized areas. And these mainstream scientific articles, in my opinion, leave room for the media and government to adjust the narrative according to the circumstances that occur that are not within their control. And of course, the name of the shark in Under Paris had to be named Lilith, which is a female demonic figure of Jewish folklore, and her name and personality are thought to be derived from the class of Mesopotamian demons. In Jewish mythology, she's theorized to be the first wife of Adam and a primordial she-demon, and Lilith is cited as having been banished from the Garden of Eden for not complying and obeying Adam. Notre Dame Cathedral is dedicated to Mary, the Virgin and the Child placed in the centre on the pillar between the two doors, and tramples on the serpent, the symbol of Satan. Under the pillar, a bas relief represents the story of Adam and Eve in 3 sequences: Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, or earthly paradise, and the temptation of Adam and original sin. And the devil is represented under the form of Lilith, an alluring woman with a long serpent's tail, and the expulsion of the first men from the Garden of Eden. And beneath the immense forecourt of Notre Dame lies an archaeological site that allows visitors to relive life on the city of the island. It's known as the historic heart of Paris, and it's the largest crypt in Europe. The site represents discoveries made during the digs that took place between 1965 and 1972, when preparations were underway to construct an underground car park on the site. And Seine takes its name from Sēquana, the Celtic Gallo-Roman goddess of the river. And the springs of Sēquana at the source of the Seine has been the site of a healing shrine since the 2nd century BC. The Celts revered Sēquana as a goddess, and Romans viewed her as a nymph, and people of both cultures visited her springs and left votive offerings. In Celtic spirituality, the spirit of the land was often embodied in water, in springs, rivers, lakes, and Sēquana is both the surface and underground waters of the Seine. The Celts had found the main source of the river and had erected in these places a temple dedicated to the goddess. And although she still existed in Gallo-Roman times, Sēquana was originally a Gaelic deity, and the people gave a high spiritual nature to springs, especially when they were abundant or of remarkable aspect. It's all about Mem, the water, the primordial waters of creation. And there are so many references to water in the research that I'm doing. Even the seahorse flare brings me back to Mem and the hippocampus and Ammon's horn. And sadly, the Seine River is so contaminated that bacterial tests conducted in mid-June show that the Seine is still too polluted to host a triathlon and marathon swimming events. So don't worry, there won't be any mako sharks that can self-impregnate swimming around in the water in the Seine, attacking athletes during the Paris Olympics. And to add some final thoughts before I end this, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if something were to occur prior to the Olympics. There's still a month left to go, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if something happened just before, which causes some countries to boycott or pull out from attending due to safety concerns. So yeah, that's also something I've thought about. But I think I'll end it here, so thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you all on the next one.